Hello, everyone. Welcome to this webinar about Aneman. Above me over here is Dennis, who is in East Coast US in the morning, and I'm here in Europe in the afternoon. So that's why he's fresher, and that's why he's above me.
Good morning, everybody.
So the idea of this webinar is a little bit, first of all, like always, if you have questions, if you want to you think that there are things we haven't covered or whatever, do not hesitate to use the chat and to type your comments about it. So the idea of this webinar is a little bit to explain, and it was on the request of Dennis and of others, but we do it with Dennis, so it's in English, to answer some basic question, explain what Aneman is, as it is one of the centerpiece that will go with our hardware devices such as Hapi, Horus, or Anubis. And it's the tool, basically the virtual patch, to be able to interconnect all of those together with your workstation, either on a Mac or on a PC. So we're not going to talk about Mac PC or versus one or the other, because in terms of Aneman, it's really exactly the same. So I'm going to spend a few minutes explaining the basics, explaining the graphics also, so that you understand where two things are, what those signs mean, and so on. And then Dennis going to go a bit more in depth and ask questions of what I wouldn't have covered, or perhaps things that to go more into detail. And of course, your questions are also very welcome. Good. So let's start with this. You will see the screen here. I move my mouth over it, and not my mouth, my mouse, sorry, over it. And first of all, I use the trackball in the middle of this mouse. With this trackball, I first of all can zoom in and zoom out of what I have on this general view. And this is just a graphic display about what's happening here. So I have, and you see it with the camera here, I have two Anubis devices, one of them where I'm connected this microphone and this headphone so that I can talk to you and hear Dennis, for example, or hear myself to broadcast. So I use them at the same time. But I have two devices so that they show up here, Anubis 1, Anubis 2, and for the moment it's the serial number that is down here, but I could change the name of the device, and it could be Anubis Room 1, Anubis Room 2 if I want to. And I have here a workstation on a PC, as it is an Azure driver that is connected. There is already a zone, there is already things, but you're gonna understand it, how to set it up in a second. So if I zoom a little bit out, the first thing I want to explain is that you see here a planet down there, this gray area, this darker gray area, and a pin, this lighter gray area. So basically I have two main zones, the pinned area and the world zone with this planet. If I move this device down here, it's now in the world zone. And this is the first time I launch Aneman, this is how it happens. It will be in the world zone, or the world view if you want. That means that I can use it, I can make connections, I can do things with it, but the moment I will close my Aneman, I will go home in the evening and I will switch off the power and disconnect all the power of all the devices. The next morning I come back, I will have to redo those connections because it doesn't remember those connections. It's basically a constant refresh in the world zone. This is why as soon as I have a device and I know I'm gonna use it regularly, I just can bring it into the pin zone. And that means that in this case, for example, with those three devices, I might make some connections and I might switch off this Anubis because I use it somewhere else in another studio, not in this network. Then I have some connections that have been done, and I will switch it on back in this network, and it will remember those connections, okay, that have previously been done with this device on that network. So it's a form of a memory that is kept with Aneman and with those devices, and so that once you reconnect it on the network, you don't need to redo all those connections each time. So this is why at the beginning, once you have a device that shows up here and you know you're going to use it regularly, just bring it up. in the pin zone, and then you can work with it, and the memory will be in use on that aspect. Do you want to add something with that, Dennis, or let's continue?
Yeah, the only one thing that for users that is really helpful is that if you have a device in the world zone and it turns off or disappears from the network, it disappears fully from Aneman. You won't actually see it. If you've moved it up into the pin zone and it either gets turned off or drops off the network, it kind of ghosts. The icon stays there, but it kind of goes translucent. So it's a way of kind of noticing, hey, where is that asset? It was on my network, but now it's gone kind of translucent, and I've lost the connection. So that's another main difference between the two zones.
Exactly. I forgot this aspect, and I'm just going to do it now, actually. I'm going to disconnect my Anubis, my second Anubis, and it's going to disappear in a second. Now it's gone, you see. It's exactly what Dennis was explaining. I switch it back on again, but it means it is still here. You still can see, okay, there was a device, this device XYZ from room 2, and it's perhaps with my colleague because he went to record something physically. I mean, he went to record something outside, but as soon as I will reconnect it to my network and it will be switched on, it will show up again. And this is, and its connections. If there are no connections here in that example for the moment, but if there would have been connections made when it was available, it will remember those connections when I will switch it on back again. And this wouldn't happen if I would do it in the world view down here. You see, now it's back on, it switches on, and it's back here now. If I would have switched it off, if I would have switched it off down here, it wouldn't have remembered, it wouldn't have been grayed out while I switch it off, and it wouldn't have remembered the connections if I would have made some connections. Good. Let's go a bit further now. This is the world view, the world view, and the pin view. There is a zone. I'm going to come to this zone a little bit later, where it's written sample rate zone. The first thing is here, when I click on one of those devices, first of all, if I leave my mouse on there, I see the name of it, what type of device it is, the serial number. I see the version also. Obviously, all those devices have firmware. And logically, one would want that they all are at the same level within the same network so that they can talk together. So this is also a quick way to check, oh, this one hasn't been connected for a while and it's not the same version. It's perhaps a good way that I can update this version, and I can right-click and go to the proceeding of updating it via a web page. And then below, basically, the IP address, the sample rate it's in, it disappears after a few seconds. The sample rate it's in, the IP address, and that the status is okay, basically, and the machine or the device is working properly. As you will remark, as soon as I click on it, on the right side, dynamically of my screen, it shows its I/O. And if I do that now with two devices, like this, it shows both devices, okay? It shows both devices. It shows also the serial number again, or the name, if it happened. And it shows also this little square. Here it has a green square. Here it has nothing. It could be a red square, for example. And that means that if there's a green square, it means that all the connections are fine. If there's a red square, it doesn't mean it doesn't work. It means that some of the connections, perhaps also some of the connections that have been done to a previous device, but because the device is not there, so those connections cannot work. So basically it shows that streams are not working. On this device, there's nothing because there's no streams or connection that had been done yet. We will do some. And obviously, it shows here, and I can move a little bit further down the road there, it shows all the in and outputs of the device. And this is, of course, then dependent on what you set up on the device. I give you one example. On my Anubis 1, you see I have a connection called VDM. This is actually through the connection I'm talking to you. I have a connection called DAW1, DAW2, and so on. And here I have other connections. There's also one called DAW, but there's one also called stream. So whatever I'm doing, I can really change those things. It means that, let me do that here. is that I'm gonna add a new source on that device, create a new source, source 5 it's called, good. And now if I go here, I will see it will have added this source 5. Where is it? Sorry, there it is, source 5. It's a bit silly because it's in mono. Let me change it, and I will put it into something a bit bigger so that you can see that it's real dynamically changing what happens here. There we go, source 5. Okay, now you have those 4 connectors available. So dynamically, it shows constantly what happens on the device and what is available. So it means if an in and an output or a stream is not available, it won't show up. And now, obviously, you can connect the in and the outputs of those devices. So here on this side, it shows what are the available, basically, inputs of this device. So it means that here I have now my of this Anubis, I have my what we call the combo 1 and 2, which is basically the XLR 1 and 2 that could be either mic pre or it could be line input, and the same on the other one. So now I would like, for example, to connect the XLR input 1 and 2 to the output XLR of my first Anubis. So simply, I would make those 2 connections. And here it shows me also in green that I can make this connection. If I would do the same over here, it shows me in red. I cannot do this connection, obviously, or in gray here, where it's a irrelevant connection. Basically, it's a nonsense connection. Now, while I'm moving my mouse over here, I see it in green. It's all happy up there. You see the top corner here, it gives me messages. So here it tells me, okay, connecting the combo 1 to XLR1 in 48K. Everybody's happy. I could do it. I will do it in a second. And if I move back onto this red one, it will tell me something. It tells me, oh, output is already receiving. That's why it's red. Actually, it's an output that is already used. And if I look a little bit further up here under this VDM, I see that there's this square here. We'll come to the color coding in a second, but it tells me here, this is used. I cannot use it because there's already a connection. I don't know where for the moment, but there is one. That's why I can't use it. So if I want to come back to make this connection here, I click there and there. For the moment, the connection is not done. For the moment, the connection, let's say it's initiated, okay? Because I could do several connections. I could do this, and I could do also that, for example, and move around, and then click once for all to make all the collections in one go. And where do I click? It is up here. So basically, you have apply multicast, apply unicast, and cancel changes. Cancel obviously says it all, but apply unicast, it's basically make the connections in unicast, make the connections in multicast, make the connections in unicast, and the difference is basically multi, says it multi, so you make the connection, but you can also use the same connection to connect another device. That's basically network-based, and exactly what we're doing now. We broadcast something, you can, all the viewers, receive it at the same time. Not one at a time, but all at the time. The unicast would be only one at a time, okay? And this is basically the difference between multicast and unicast, and the same here in an audio stream. Now, one has to be aware is that doing the multicast is the beauty of the network, and it's fantastic, but it's also hungry in bandwidth. So if you have 2 channels in a small network that you multicast everywhere, that's all good. But when you start to work with 64 channels and you have 5 studios and you want to multicast them everywhere, it means all the switches in between have to do 5 times 64 channels, and that can block, without any need, the bandwidth of the network or your availability of the network. So when you know exactly where to go to, the unicast makes total sense because you can make a connection over it. And sorry, I guess I lost it now. It's there. You can make a connection over it and connect those 2 devices together in unicast or in multicast. Interestingly now, I have made those connections there, and if I make another connection here, for example, and this time in multicast, you see that now here I have made those connections together and they behave there. Of course, the color will then be different if you use, let me do a third one, or let's do it between this device and that device. Sorry, like this, up. Let me do a connection over here so that you see the other color. If I do that now in blue, I have now those connections over there, over here, like this, and multicast. Okay. It doesn't want to make it in Unicast, in multicast. Okay, cancel those connections. And let's make it like, whoops, let's make it like that together. So you see that now all those colors will show up here when it's connected. And because I made all those connections, you see now on the left side of the screen also that let's say strings have been, or arrows have been made with the numbers of channels that have been connected between one and the other, okay? And all those connections are valid. That's why also they have a simple arrow. If there would be an arrow with some red around, it means that there is a connection, but that it is not valid for whatever reason. One of the reasons could be because the two devices are not in the same sample rate, for example, okay? We come to that in a little second. So remember, you can dynamically change the selection of the different devices you have here, and they will show up right away on the right side. And that means that you can connect them together as long as they appear here and as long as the receiver here is not used already, which is the case here. So here you can right-click and you can then delete the receiver to be able to connect it again in this configuration. But that means that if you connect it, if your colleague, for example, has connected it into another network environment, he will have lost its connection because there's only one connection possible. Last but not least, you see now here the green arrow on the top of those Anubises, and they are now green in both cases. You remember when we started the webinar, there was no green arrow on this one because there were no connections established. And this is now the difference. Good. Do you want to add something to that, Dennis? Or I can
think
continue
just
to
maybe
the next step.
the easiest way for users to remember what multi and unicast is. So multicast would be if you wanted to take your stereo bus out of your DAW and send it to the D to A outputs to go to your speakers, but you also wanted to send it directly to the headphones also without having to make another bus in your DAW. So it's basically a way of multing outputs to multiple places.
Exactly. And I mean, I always explain it also with a microphone. I mean, you have a microphone on stage and or several microphones on stage. You want to record them into one device, so you make a unicast. You want to record them in several devices, so you make a multicast. And because you then multiply the numbers of items that can be reached, basically. Let me go back to the left screen and the screen or the part that is below. When I say screen, basically, it's a bit wrong. It's parts because I can move them. I can also somehow bring them to the top left, bring them to the bottom down. I can really organize my Aneman the way I want it. But I organized it here as it is by default. One thing that I wanted, and if you lost it, you can go back to here and then bring it back wherever you want into a place on the right, on the left, and so on. So one thing I wanted to show here are the different devices. You can also select them here. This is basically the written side of what you see on the left side here. But here is that I have my ASIO driver, basically my computer, my Anubis 1 and my Anubis 2. What is now interesting to observe is that here on the written side of it, you have the IP address of them, and if you go a little bit further, you have some other informations that are interesting. And one information that is important is that you see that you have a little Swiss watch on this Anubis here. And this is where I'm referring now to the PTP down here. So again, this is on the view, and you can enable or disable what you want to see. So the matrix view is obviously the patch bay, the devices is just the window we saw, and the PTP is the one below here. And the PTP, basically, it tells me now, so for those who are not aware, it tells me now which one is the master in terms of the clock, the network clock. We agree. It has nothing to do here with word clock or whatever. Is that in my network, we have a clock that is called PTP, for Precision Time Protocol, and this is distributing the clock to all the devices that are on the network. And basically, there is one device that is the so-called grandmaster clock. And for the moment, this is the device that is the grandmaster clock in my case. If I would switch off this device, or for whatever reason this device would disappear, it will then automatically elect another device that is a grandmaster clock, and this device will then receive this little clock here and move to that place. We see it down here in the PTP that there is one device that is the grandmaster clock, and the other one is the slave, so to say, on that aspect. Good. Let me close that here again, and let make me this a little bit smaller. So what is now great is that, coming back to before, I can select all the 3 devices, and of course now if I make a smaller window here, I can have more devices to be able to interconnect the way I want, okay? But now it becomes, of course, a bit more complicated, especially thinking of that you might have several devices on the same network. And therefore, you might say, okay, I have several devices, but I have also several rooms, let's say, or several studios or rooms or floors and so on. And I would like visually to move those devices a little bit together so that I can visually manage them in an easier way. So if I unzoom a little bit, I have here the possibility of creating what we call logic zones and sample rate zones. So a sample rate zone, I have one already here. This is one that I created before starting this webinar. I can create a second sample rate zone if I wish, but for the moment I will just create a new logic zone. And this is basically a new square that is here. Holding shift allows me to move the size of the square, and right-clicking on the little corner here where the question mark is allows me to change something. So I prepared a little slide. That's a little bit unfortunate, is that because of the broadcasting here, what I'm doing in terms of YouTube, I don't see the full contextual menu that I'm supposed to do. That's a graphic issue. So this is where I prepared a little slide behind where you can see it straight away. So this is now my little slide. And clicking on those right contextual menu on the right side here brings me first of all to the possibility to change the color. If I want to have it green, yellow, or whatever. It's also, I can have several layers. So I can have zones in zones, or sample rate zone in zones, for example, or sample rate zones in logic zones, and so on. And I can finally remove the zone if I don't want it anymore, for whatever reason. So once I'm in here, I can say, okay, this is a logical zone, and I can place devices in this logical zone. So I could make it even bigger like this, and I would say, okay, this could be, for example, my entire studio. And then I will create 2 sample rate zones that I will bring in here, for example. So this is sample rate zone 1, and this is sample rate zone 2. A sample rate zone is basically that you have to have a device that you elect as a king, boop, and or a queen, if you prefer. So this is now my sample rate master of all the devices that I will put into this zone, or that I will move into this zone. Now none is in there. But if I bring this one in here, this one will now follow the sample rate of this device and not anymore of that one. Okay? So this is interesting. Let's say I have 2 rooms or 2 studios, and those 2 studios are sometimes sharing their devices because of bigger productions, their resources, and sometimes One is working, let's say, in 44.1 and the other one in 96K. So I can create two zones, and I've just put the right devices in the proper zones with the proper master, or the queen or the king of the sample rate. That could be a hardware device or software, as I want. And then changing the sample rate of this very device will then change the sample rate of all the devices that are in this zone. So instead of going from one machine to the other, it does it straight away. So this is the idea of the sample rate zone. And of course, here, if I look a little bit closer now, it tells me that this sample rate zone is in 48K because this device has been put into 48K, and this one is waiting for the master because it hasn't had a master yet. Okay, good. So now I put them all back into this zone again, and this one could disappear if I want. The logical zone that is behind is actually only visual. It means I could, for example, have different devices that behave here that are independent, but so I can see them part of my environment, but I don't put them into a logical zone because I just want to see, okay, this is my floor one, and the other one, the other logical zone, for example, I put here to the side is my floor two. Okay, so I can make this bigger, and this is floor one, this is floor two. I could change colors, so I could define them. So the logical zone is only to visually basically define things, where the sample rate zone, you can of course define it visually as well, but specifically what is the most important, you define a king or a queen for the sample rate master, and then all the devices that are within this zone have or change their sample rate on that aspect. Dennis, do you want to add something?
Yeah, with the sample rate zone, it's important to remember that it's just for sample rate. It's just for ease, so that if you change sample rate in a project, it changes sample rate on all of the devices in the same zone. It actually has nothing to do with clocking. That's something that users get confused with sometimes. Is that this aspect of it is just for ease, and you can still have multiple devices or other devices that are the actual PTP master for your network. And the crown, or whoever's in the crown, is just to define to the rest of the devices what the sample rate is.
Yes, again, to be very clear, and perhaps to add what Dennis is saying, is that just to make clear about the clock, this is why I was talking about this little watch here. So in the IP domain, or in the IP world, let's call it this way, of course you could have a device, I don't have one here now, but you could have a device with digital inputs, and so you would have a work clock, for example, so that this device would be from an external input be clocked to a word clock or be slave to a word clock. But in the IP domain, in the IP world, the audio over IP world, you have one device that is the PTP master. So there is no word clock. It is the PTP that is distributed independently of the sample rate. In the IP world, it has nothing to do with the sample rate. The devices can all be on different sample rates, and nevertheless, they are clocked together. Okay, this is why you only have one clock, and you could have multiple sample rate zones, but they're all happy and behave together. And also, they don't need to be connected in terms of audio streams together to be able to be clocked. Okay, so it's because they are visible here, they are together on the same network, that they are clocked together. That's it. One thing, as we're talking about network, which is also interesting and important to understand, for those who have used already Aneman, and I'm going to go back to something very basic here, out of those zones. You see that I have my three devices, and they all have a little yellowish, salmonish, orange color around. This is basically, and you see it when I pass my mouse on it, you have the IP address, and below, wait that it appears again, and below we have a net mask. This is basically the subnet mask in which my, or in where my LAN is existing on the network. And you've seen it for some of you, perhaps, that you have sometimes 255, 255, 0, 0. Sometimes you have 3 times 255, and so on. And this would be another subnet mask. That means also that if I would put this device in 255, 255, 255, instead of only 2 times, but 3 times, then it would behave on the same network, but not on the same network mask. And so I wouldn't be able to interconnect my devices. This would be interesting for bigger infrastructures. But in terms of visibility of my Aneman, this would then change color. This would have a different color than my others that would remain with this yellowish, salmonish color. And so this is visually to understand that my device is on another network mask. Then I can change it, of course, or not, because that's something I want. So this is then in terms of management. Do you want to add something, Dennis?
No, I think that that sounds good. I think that with those colors, people get confused because once it becomes another color or is on another net mask, you still can bring up the router and everything, but of course it won't allow you to route to it. So that's, and it also will tell you that it's on a different in the worldview will tell you that it's on a separate
subnet
net
mask.
mask.
Yeah, exactly.
Very easily.
So we have 2 questions here. I'm just gonna try to understand it. Would you be able to show how to patch a traditional hardware insert in Pro Tools with Aneman? I don't have a Pro Tools here now, but it's not really relevant if it's a Pro Tools or not a Pro Tools. It is just that, let's say that we have here, this is basically it's a PC, so it's not a Mac, so but it would be Core Audio instead of ASIO, but it's literally exactly the same. So basically, we would have here our 2 devices, and let's say that you use the output 19 and 20, or let's say 21 and 22 as the output of your Pro Tools bus. You would connect this one to the output, for example, that I have here of my jack 3 and 4, and then I would apply the connection. Boom. Now this is done. And then I would have to do the same with the input. So my input would be, for example, I would choose, for example, I don't know, 13 and 14 over here. And I would use now this input to be able to connect it over here. And this would be my main input, which would be then the connection of my hardware device back into the insert return of the Pro Tools. And I have to clearly apply the Multicast or the Unicast to be able to make this connection. And then I connected my insert in Pro Tools. So basically it's connecting IOs in Pro Tools with the channel insert. And when I say in Pro Tools, that is also valid for any other DAW that has inserts on a bus structure. And the second question is, what if equipment is moved between a studio? Can you save logic zones? Yes, we can. Let me come back to this picture here that I had on my, over here, is that we can choose here on the contextual menu different possibilities, first of all, to clear errors also, to change the color, to change the names, and so on. And you can change, you can right-click and save different connections on it, or you can literally recall and save entire network connections. So what I would advise, I'm not saying this is absolutely necessary, but what I would advise is typically if you have a few devices and sometimes you have less devices and another routing and you go outside somewhere on mobile recording, you have one preset in terms of connections that is for outside and one preset that is for inside. And if you have a colleague that continues to work inside, you have a third preset for when he or she is working inside. So it's not only changing the logic zone or the sample rate zone, it's changing the entire setup and you can recall it very easily. Good. It seems that for SD, I don't know who it is, we answered the question. Okay, good. If you have questions, sorry, again, do not hesitate to type them in and we try to answer. I lost the flow a little bit. Yes. One thing that is important to understand is that we have here, for the moment, merging devices. So it means that we have Anubis devices, it could be Hapi or Horus. We have here our driver, either Mac or PC. That is all our development, and luckily and obviously that works all together. Now we have here a little window called Manage Plugins. It means that I can use devices from other manufacturers in my Aneman. Okay, you would need to download the plugin basically to be able to work, but there are some speakers from Genelec, there are some direct out devices. I mean, I'm not going to go through the entire list, but there are some other manufacturers. This is basically to be able to be seen in Aneman and to interconnect those other manufactured devices within your merging devices. Now, this is still remaining on the same basically network level. So that brings me into the network where in this, how can I say, setup, we are working with different protocols of network. They are basically, I mean, there are several, but let's talk about 3 network protocols or ways of connecting audio over IP devices. There is Ravenna is one of them, there is DANTE is another one, and there's AS67. So let's start with the 2 first one. Ravenna and DANTE are basically proprietary network protocols. It means that I would need a Ravenna device to be able to connect to another Ravenna device. I would need a DANTE device to be able to connect to another DANTE device. Connecting to a DANTE device to a Ravenna device is impossible. Okay? That's the bottom line. Now, that was a few years back. Luckily, the AES, the Audio Engineering Society, came up with a standard basically called AES for Audio Engineering Society, number 67. And this standard is has the beauty to be able to interconnect a Ravenna AS67 device to a DANTE AS67 device. So this is the theory in terms of the possibilities, and they exist. Now, this is only in terms of connecting the audio. But as you see here, what we do with Aneman, we connect audio via the grid, but we also discover what we call the in and the outputs of those devices. This is not AS67. This is a layer above. We can do this type of things because we use a tool like Aneman. To be able to connect, it is possible, of course, and to be able to connect a device that is AS67 Ravenna and AS67 DANTE, and I insist there, it has to be an AS67 DANTE because there are some DANTE that are not. So this is why I'm insisting. So it has to be an AS67 DANTE. You will see at the bottom of this YouTube that there are, I added some resources, and I'm not going to go into detail because it would need another time to go through everything, and it exists. I mean, we've done some webinars about how to connect an AS67 stream to a DANTE AS67 stream, and some others did it, and there's a PDF as well. They are all at the bottom of this YouTube, and you can go through, and yeah, it's a bit fiddling around, but it works perfectly. And anyway, we think that generally speaking, once you made your AS67 DANTE to AS67 connections, you established them, sorry, and you made 12 channels or 24 channels or 64 channels, but then you know, oh, it's channel from 1 to 64 or 65 to 128 or whatever it is, and you just made your connections. You don't need to independently make one channel after each other. Good. There's some other questions coming in.
Yeah, I just saw that question of the confused by the connection to and from is to input and from input. One thing that's can be confusing. It took me a little bit to fully understand, is that Aneman stands for Audio Network Manager, and what we're actually doing in Aneman is making connections to and from the network. That's why it says connections from and connections to, is that we're not. It's not a traditional router where you're taking two boxes that have inputs and outputs and connecting them to the inputs and outputs. And the reason why it is this way as a connection from and to the network is that these connections can be virtual. So you could connect one computer, say a Mac, run it to a PC without having to go through a piece of hardware. So that's one thing I think it takes a little bit of work to kind of wrap your head around, because it's different than how other routers work, is that you're making connections to and from the network. Is that the best way you think to explain it, Maurice?
Yes, because I understand. I understand the fact that people who will just have one device with a workstation, for them it's a bit like, okay, but why do I need to do all of that? Okay, I understand that very much. But at the same time, you do it once and you never change it again, because you have only one device and one software, one DAW. You connect all the IOs you have and then you leave it. But the beauty of it, as soon as you add a second device, then you have the network capability. And exactly as Dennis explained, then you need to think in a network model, in the fact that you have in and outputs of your device, might they be DAW, so software based, or hardware based, and you need to connect those in and outputs. It's not the in and outputs that you have in the device, but the in and outputs that are available as outputs from your DAW as inputs to the network. And once they behave in the network, you have to connect them to outputs and then to inputs of the device again. So you have a double connection each time, but that allows you, we're talking about multicast, that allows you exactly to achieve that. Is that you could have, let's say, you record different musicians in different rooms or different spaces, and each of them has an Anubis, which is this device, for example, to be able to listen to it, but at the same time to get the playback at the same time. So you have your DAW in your room that plays back something, I mean a stereo playback, and this via the network is then sent in each of these devices in multicast, okay, let's say 4 Anubises. And because of that, you have one output of the workstation that goes into one input or stereo input, 2 inputs of the network. But those 2 inputs can be multicast. So this is why you have to make this connection, because the workstation doesn't know how to multicast. So it's not a network. So as soon as you're then in the network, you have the capability of multicasting it into 4 different places or more if you wish, so that everyone is having this playback real time, without latency, in the sense, synchronized together, so that all 4 playbacks play at the same time, and so that the singers or whoever the artists are can then record their stuff, and this stuff is then sent back to 4 channels, if those are 4 microphones, 1 for each, for example, back into the workstation. And yes, you have to do these double connections, because you can interconnect and demultiply connections to different devices at the same time. But and this is why, coming now here, you have the outputs, and then in what they going, those outputs, and this could be inputs of other devices or outputs of the other devices. But the beauty of it is that I can connect it here, and I can at the same time connect it here if I want. So I can demultiply those those outputs. A few other questions came up. Yes, the in and the output, I think we answered that. Latency. Aneman is actually not providing or enhancing or diminishing or whatever it is latency. It is just a connection tool. Where you have latency, or where you could get latency, is because of the core audio driver or the ASIO driver that obviously has a certain buffer to be able to process the sound and send it to the network. Send it to the core audio that sends it to the network. And this is then down to the system that has not really anything to do with Aneman on that aspect. I mean, Aneman is just a connection tool. It's basically a virtual patch, as I call it all the time. Can you speak about DXD and DSD? DXD, DSD is the same way of connecting. Nevertheless, there's a difference, is that DXD is basically a PCM signal. I mean, more or less a PCM signal, but the behavior in Aneman is like a PCM signal. So that means you can demultiply things, which you can't in DSD. Do you have anything to add, Dennis, about DXD and DSD?
Yeah, I mean, it essentially works the same as it has before. And if we go one step, it doesn't actually have anything to do with Aneman, but if you're actually using an Anubis in DSD, you can't say fold a 5.1 down to a stereo because there's no DSD mixing in this. It's the same limitations that have always kind of been with DSD, where it's
yeah, as it is a 1-bit signal, you cannot sum it and so on. That's why you go to the DXD relevant, where then you can process it like a PCM signal. And if you use the sample rate zone in DSD or in DXD, but then your king or your queen will be in DXD, for example, and then it will change here back to DXD or 352.4 or whatever it is. Okay. Did I miss out something on the notes we made? Yes. Yes.
Not really. The only thing that I maybe be good to point out is kind of if you're lost, if something's not working and you can't get something to connect, you're just not sure. Sometimes a good way is just to start over. I think Maurice touched on it slightly earlier. If you choose all of your devices and then just go up to action and kind of clear all connections, that'll allow you to kind of start over. You can do selected and all connections. So if you just want to clear connections to one device, you also can do that. And so that sometimes that is a good way to go. If you can't figure something out, just clearing everything and redoing your connections is a good way, or an easier way, unless you have a very huge network with many devices and you don't want to redo all the patching. But if you have a small network, sometimes just clearing everything and starting over is a good way to go.
Yeah, perhaps one thing. I mean, clear selected connections. It's basically if I just select this guy, and I say clear selected connection, it will only clear it for this selected device. And obviously, if I select 2 of them, it will do it for 2 of them, and so on. And if I say all connection, despite if I selected something or nothing, it will clear really all connections. So this is a bit dangerous if you put a lot of work into your patching. But it brings me to one thing that is important also, very basic, is that now if I close it, it's like, oops, well, there's a PowerPoint behind, but oops, where did I put it? And actually there is, it behaves in my, what you see here is actually my second screen. So, but it behaves in the taskbar and you can recall it from the taskbar. But what you can do also is that you can dock the icon of the Aneman or not. If you say not, so now I close it and it will really disappear. So it means that I have to relaunch Aneman to be able to see it again. Okay, so either one is really closing it, which is when I undo this. I mean, I tick this, or if I tick this, which is the normal status of when I install it the first time, then my Aneman is actually only hiding and gets into the task manager, the taskbar.
Yeah, and the reason why that is slightly important is that with all of the sample rate zones and everything that we've made over on the left-hand side here, if Aneman is not open or if it's not in the dock, the sample rate zones are not functional. So this is the reason why when you do hit the X and you have the dock turned on, it goes down in your dock and doesn't actually close, because some people want to, obviously want to keep their sample rate zone in working a lot easier without having to go and change sample rates.
Yeah. Um, Another question is just about the streams. So basically, yes, to answer this question, I have here my green squares everywhere. If I right click, I will see that I have different streams that are available from this device. So I could delete them. And if it would be red, it will tell me also, I invite you to go to the user manual that is also below as a resource, where you have a few codes explaining what it means, and you can delete the stream from there. So typically, let's say that, again, we come into this combination of having a device, one of your devices, that sometimes is used outside and sometimes inside. So it's connected to the network, disconnected, connected again, and it will have, for whatever, I mean, there are reasons, but not necessary to explain now. It will have been connected to other networks, and therefore it keeps this connection in mind. So here, from there, you can delete this previous connection, meaning also that the next time it's connected outside, it will not recognize it, this connection, as it has been deleted. The same here, if you right click, you can also this time not disconnect the connection, the stream, but the receiver, basically, as it is one side or the other. Last but not least, I haven't talked about this, and this is specific to Anubis. If I just tick one Anubis, you remember that we did connections that were either blue for Unicast, either purple for Multicast, and the ones that have been connected but are not connected now, they are orange, like here. And then you have some black ones, but this is just for Anubis. This is basically the internal patch, the way it is connected. So for the moment, the outputs in the monitoring section called main, I can change the name, but called main, are connected to my XLR output 1 and 2. If I don't want this, I can delete this connection and put them somewhere else. Or I can use this connection for another output now. But by default, by factory presets, these are the connections, how they're done, and this is why they are black, because they are specifically only to the internal patch of Anubis. In live multi-channel audio from, let's say, HDM-based source. Okay, so I invite you about about what I'm doing now, typically the live TV satellites and so on, into Anubis, into the network. I invite you to watch our merging audio device webinar, because this is where it is exactly, and what I'm using now, it's basically this device, but I'm not going to talk about this now. I'm just going to show you quickly. It's basically the merging audio device where I have my network card, I have my two Anubises, my DAW that is running behind, and basically I have my ASIO in and output, and below here I have my VDM enabling. And now I'm using those two channels. Well, it's a one channel, I mean, it's a two mono channel summed, as I have one microphone, not two, but a two channel input and a two channel output to be able to talk to you. But this is another topic, and I strongly invite you to watch the webinar about it. It's called Merging Audio Device, and it has been done, I think, a month ago or something like that. Okay. Is there a plan to do this double patch on the DAW to patch in Aneman and Pyramix? Yes, but this is exactly what we were discussing before. The double patching, because this is a network patch that is actually ignoring what it is connected to. And this is exactly why you can multicast, why you can connect it to several outputs, for example, or an input can be set up to connected to several machines, for example, to have redundancy. So that's the idea. This will not change. It will actually, we will go more into this world, because the network capability is exactly needed more and more to be able to stream and to do things with multiple devices being in multiple locations. I'm sorry if I wasn't clear, but I tried to answer one question in there. Good. Dennis, do you want to add something else, or shall we put an end to it?
I think everything is great. I mean, everybody listening or watching this in the future, because it will be up on YouTube, of course, can contact us if you have any questions, either support@merging.com or dennis@independentaudio.com. Um, and we're always here to help. We know that Aneman can be kind of confusing, but because of the sophistication of how to work with a network, it gives you a lot of um, possibilities that you wouldn't just get if it was just a straight patch. So if you don't understand something, or if it's a little bit confusing, just get a hold of one of us, and we can always help.
Yeah. Same thing with the last comment I see, that there's sometimes some problems opening. There's an error message. Please send us the detail, and our support will look into it. And one thing that helps also is that you can dump the network map. So it means this becomes a file here. This becomes an ANOV saves JSON file, and you can send this to us, to our support, and we'll try to sort it from there. Okay, I think that's it. Dennis?
Yeah, that sounds great. Thank you very much.
Thank you all for listening. Have all a lovely day, and talk to you or text to you for the next webinar. Bye, Dennis. Take care.
Yep. See you later.